In this video, I'm going to show you how to build stairs. So I'm going to show you how to lay out the stringers. I'm going to show you how to build the landing. I'm going to show you how to install the treads and the whole 9 yards. So if you're new to this channel, my name's Josh. This channel is all about DIY to save a ton of money. So be sure to subscribe, ring that bell so you get notification every time I release a new video, and hammer that like button for me. That's all I ask in return for making this video. So we've got a lot to go over today, so let's get started. The stairs I'm going to be building in this building are going to be coming up to a landing and then shooting up to the upstairs for an L shape. And you definitely want to check your local building codes before starting your stairs because they can vary from region to region. So the building codes I'm following here are for my local jurisdiction, but they are very general to most areas, but definitely check your local building codes first. Important information you need to know before you start building your stairs is what you're going to be using for flooring, and specifically the thickness of the flooring. So if you're going to be using 3/4 hardwood floor, or if you're going to be using tile, or if you're going to be doing something that's 1/2 inch, you need to know that information because whenever we take a measurement for our height from the very bottom of the floor up to the top of the floor of the upper part of the stairs, that's going to be critical information because that's going to manipulate the height in which we got to build our stairs. So for instance, here we're going to be placing our tape measure directly on the concrete because that's going to be the finished floor in this structure, and then going to measure up to the very top of the opening and then compensate for the flooring thickness. All right, if we take a look here, we got 123 inches to the top of the subfloor. Now in this case, the top of the subfloor is the finished floor because we're building this in a garage. So if I was putting 3/4 inch hardwood floor, I would actually say the top of the opening was 123 3/4 inch. But in this case, 123 even is the actual measurement. And again, always compensate for your flooring thickness once you get up to the top of your stairs. Now that I know my height, I need to figure out the distance in which my stringers need to run. So this is very important to think about. Now, in this case, I got this stairwell coming down and then L-shaping over where this camera is setting. So I already figured to where the max distance I can place this header here in order to intersect my steps into this opening to go up. And this actually will count as a rise of the stairs. And the reason why I had to stop it there is because I need headroom here in the bathroom in order to access the toilet and sink. So my stairs are going to come down through here. So I need to know the distance from the edge where this landing is over to this header. And I already know that it's 123 inches to the edge of that header as well. So you need to know the max distance in which you can run your stairs. Now that we know we're shooting for a max height of 123 inches, we now need to know some codes and exactly what we're dealing with here. So whenever you have a rise on your steps, that's considered a riser. So we're thinking about rise over run here. And then our max rise that we can do per code here is 7 3/4 inch. That's the max we can step up on each step. And then if we look at our run, which that's going to be our tread of our step, we can only go down to as low as 10 inches as a minimum for each tread that we step on. So if we keep those measurements in mind, we can start calculating up exactly what we need to do for each rise of our step. So we know that we have 123 inches. So I'm going to get my calculator here that we're shooting for. So we take a look here, we take 123 and we divided that by 14, let's say. So if we put 14 steps for 14 runs to get up to 123 inches, that puts us at 8.7 inches. So that's over the 7 3/4 inch max. So we can't do that with just that many steps. So let's take 123. We're going to divide that by 15. 8.2. We're still over the code. We can't do it because our 7 3/4 inch max. So let's go to 123 divided by 16. 7.68. So now we're within code, but I always recommend trying to stay below that because it's definitely a more comfortable step if you can go below that. Anything around 7 is ideal in my opinion for comfort. So if we do 123, we're going to divide that by 17. That gives us 7.235. So that's 7 1/4 inch. So that puts us within code, and we're in a comfort level to where each step isn't so taxing while we're walking on it. Now that I showed you how I came up with the 7 1/4 inch rise, how do I figure out the run? And the run is where the tread or the step's going to be. Well, that's very simple. I'm going to be using this 2x12 material, and this measures about 11 inches. Typically it's 11 1/4 for 2x12 material, but in this case it's a little bit smaller. So if I want a 3/4 inch overhang right here at the very end where the nose is going to be, I simply got to make this 10 1/4 inch in order to give me an overhang right here of 3/4 if I'm going to be using 11 inch material. And if you're wondering, hey, what about once we install our riser boards, is that going to mess up our overhang? Well, it's not, because if we have a 3/4 inch board here, it's going to push this out another 3/4 inch as well. So that's going to still give us 10 1/4 from the riser's edge to the riser's edge. So 10 1/4 inch, if I'm using 11 inch material, is what I need to cut my stringers out. Another thing I wanted to add here, if you are constrained to a certain measurement in which you got to keep your stairs in, you can manipulate your run length or your tread or your step, whatever you want to call it, in order to fit into a certain space. So that may also determine your run length on your stringer. If I was working in a tighter space and I had to shrink it down to 10 inches, I could, but I couldn't really go any shorter than 10 inches per code here. So all you gotta do is measure your total length from, let's say, the landing to where your header's gonna intercept up into the next story, and then take that and divide it however many steps you're gonna fit into that in order to manipulate that number for your tread. So that's something you may need to consider for your stairs. We now need to talk about the head clearance of our stairs. If we take a look here, we're going to be coming up to our landing that's going to be setting here, and we got our ceiling that's going to transition into the stairwell in order in which we got to enter first. So the code here is we need to make sure we're within 6'8" of head clearance if we take a slope of our step to the top of the ceiling. And we're going to be actually 6'8.5" because we got to install drywall yet, so we got to figure our finished ceiling as well here. To better illustrate the head clearance, if you take a straight edge from tip to tip of the stair stringers, if you take a look, it's going to give us a straight line like so to go off of. And if our max or minimum head clearance is 6'8". Again, this is minimum, not maximum, so it could be over 6'8" all day long. It just can't be below that. And if you were to draw a straight line, it's from the bottom of the finished ceiling to the top of the stair stringer, just like so. So that distance has to be at least 6'8" for head clearance. I'm now going to calculate the height of the landing. So the first thing I need to do is measure down 6'8.5", because I gotta allow a 1/2 inch for drywall as my finished ceiling height, as the tallest I can build this landing. So if I measure down 6'8.5", it puts me right down here. Right here is the mark I just made, measuring down 6'8.5" off the unfinished ceiling. So that is going to be the max of my height of the landing. So now we need to figure out how many steps is it going to take to get below this, but as close as I can get to this, since I'm kind of limited for run length. So now I'm going to measure up off the floor, and I got 34 inches roughly off the floor to that measurement. So now I need to know what can I do in order to get an even amount of 7 1/4 inch rises within that space. So the measurement is actually going to be 29 inches off the floor. And if you take 7 1/4 and times that by 4, that gives us 29. So 7 1/4 will evenly go into 29 inches. So that is why we're going with that as the max height of our landing. I'm now going to square a line right off the top of that mark we made. And this is going to be the top of our landing. But what we need to do is come down 3/4 inch before we start framing this to allow for our 3/4 subfloor. So 3/4 inch is right here. So that's the line we're going to level off of for our framing. I'm just going to place my level right on that mark and then draw a level line. Now I'm going to level over across this wall too, since the landing's sitting here in this corner. And now I'm going to level off this mark and go over to this wall too, where we're going to attach it to the stairwells wall. The opening for this landing is 42 inches by the time it's finished. So in order to build this per code, I need to make sure that I have at least 36 inches from where the steps stop to the distance of the landing. So I'm well beyond that. I'm at 42 inches like I just said. So that's another code in my area that I got to follow. So be sure to check your local codes to see what you got to follow. But here it has to be going 36 inches in the direction of the steps for the landing. Now as far as how far back I got to bring my landing, since my steps are going to end flush with this wall, I need to make sure I come back at least 13 inches to catch the whole bottom of the step. So if I'm just going to stop my landing back here at this next stud, because it's definitely within that range, it's actually 16 inches back. So I'm just going to have a little bit more than I need, which is fine. But as long as it ain't too short, you need to make sure you catch the whole bottom of your step. I got all the framing pre-cut for my landing. I'm now going to nail it all together. Before I put the subfloor on, I just want to explain to you a little bit about how I frame this. I placed this up to the stud and nailed into the side, and then to secure it so I don't have to bolt it is I put boards underneath of it going down to the foundation to support it. And I did that on all these, and then this last one I had to put a 1/2 inch bolt to secure it because it didn't have a way to put a board down to the floor. And this one, again, the same way as these. Let me show you the other side where I intersected this header. On this side, I secured them to the header using joist hangers. And because this is a 2x12, I didn't have to double it up to support these 2x6 joists. And over here, I did put a lag bolt to secure it to this stud. And then over here, I set the header down on this 6x6 post because we're in a 2x6 wall. So this is really stable. It ain't going anywhere. I'm now going to install the subfloor, and I'm first going to glue it down since this is part of the steps. I like to glue down my treads and my subfloor on the steps for the landing. So I'm going to start by gluing it, and then I'm going to nail it down. Before I cut my stringers, I got to install what's called a ledger board underneath of this landing. And this ledger board is going to act as a place to secure my stringers to. So we're just going to install it right underneath of the landing like so. Now that we got our ledger board on, I'm going to measure up and double check, make sure we're at 29. And as you can see, we're right at 29 inches like we calculated for. So if you remember correctly, it took 4 steps, counting this last step, to get to 29 inches with the 7 1/4 riser. So with that being said, we know we need to get 1, 2, 3 steps to get up to our 4th step here. And that's going to be what we need to cut is a 3-step stringer. I'm going to be using a 2x12 in order to cut my stringer. And the reason why I'm going to be using a 2x12 is because I need to have the correct throat distance. And that's going to be the wood that's left in between the step in the back of the stringer. But I like to have, like I said, about 5-inch throat on my stringers, and a 10-inch board, if I'm using a 2x10 for instance, gives me about 3.5 inches for this stringer. And to me, I would like a little more beefiness than that. So with that being said, I'm going to be using this 2x12. So the first thing I'm going to do is crown my 2x12 and see where the hump's at, if there is one, and I want the crown up. So let me eyeball this. It looks like I need to flip this board around, and my crown is now up. So this is going to be the top of my stringer. And now I'm going to go ahead and get my framing square, a sharp pencil, and then I like to use what are called stair gauges. And these are going to clip on to my framing square in order to keep my layout as I slide it up the board. I'm going to first show you with the framing square what I'm shooting for here. I like to use this part of the framing square for my treads or the run, and then I like to use this part of the framing square for my riser or for the rise. So I'm going to take it and I'm going to put it to where the pointy side is facing towards the wood like so, and I'm going to be using these measurements across the outside of the framing square. And to give you a quick look at what I'm doing, I want a 10 1/4 inch tread, and I want a 7¼ inch rise like we explained earlier. So right there is going to be my first mark. But before we get started, I'm going to use the stair gauges and then place them on the square so I don't have to keep holding it where I need it, and this will keep the layout on the square in order to make everything consistent and accurate. So I'm first going to line up with the 10¼ inch on the run side, and then I'm going to tighten down the gauge. I'm going to come over here to 7¼ on the rise side. Make sure these are tight and so they don't move. And now all I got to do is place that directly against the edge of the 2x12, and then I can mark it and then slide it as I go in order to keep the same layout. I'm now going to start right here at the very end of the 2x12 like so. Hold it really tight and then take my sharp pencil and begin with my layout at the very edge of this 2x12. And now this is going to be the rise. All right, and now I'm going to take my other framing square and I'm going to actually extend this line. And I know this is going to have to get cut off, but something I'd like to show, this piece of the framing square is 1.5 inches. And as you know, we're going to be using 1.5 inch tread for these steps. So I need to take this off the very bottom of our starter stringer because we need to compensate for the tread that we're going to not have off this first bottom. So you'll understand more once we lay this up here. So this first rise is going to be 1.5 inches less than 7¼ inches. So all this is going to get cut off. And I'm now going to get my other framing square that had my stair gauges on it and just continue that layout, sliding it across the board. And now all we got to do is make sure that we line up our measurement right to the point of the pre-existing layout we just put on this 2x12. And that looks good. And now I'm just going to mark that. Now I'm just going to continue this layout until we got 3 treads. And I put an X here because we know that's going to get cut out. I'm now going to slide this 10¼ inch mark up with that line right where the point hits right on the edge of the 2x12. Make sure our stair gauges are tight against the board's edge. Hold it tight and then trace. And then one more. Now right here we're going to do something a little special. We're going to have to come down 3/4 inch to compensate for a 1x that I will not be placing on this top because I'm going to be using the side of the landing that we have that finished 2x12 instead of putting a piece of 1x lumber here. So that's a special case you may or may not have to do depending on what you're shooting for. But in this case, I'm going to subtract 3/4 inch right here. And then take my square. So this is all going to get cut off. And this will be our first stringer. Before I cut this bottom out, I do gotta put a kicker board at the bottom of these stringers per code in my area. So I'm just going to use a 2x6 because that's all I had pressure treated here. A 2x4 would work fine too. So I'm just going to hold that right up to where I'm going to put the kicker board and then mark it and then cut that out as well. And when you cut this out, take your time, do a really good job because we're going to use this as the template if it looks good after we set it into place. And you don't cut past your mark because that needs cut out with the jigsaw here in a moment. I'm now going to use the jigsaw to cut this section off. Right. Now we continue cutting the rest of the stringer off. All right, here's our first stringer. Let's set it up there and see how it looks. Before I cut out any more stringers using this template, I'm going to set it up into place and double check to make sure it's right. It's very important to do that now than it is to do it later after they're all cut wrong. So you don't want to do that. So we know we still got a tread going on top of this yet. So if you add the 7 1/4 plus the 1.5 inch tread that we're going to install here, that gives us 8 3/4 inch down from the top. So we're going to mark that here before we start testing. So let me move this back a little bit. 8 3/4 will put us right here. I'm now going to take my stringer and place it right up to that mark we just made, so right there. And I'm going to take a level and double check to make sure it's pretty level sitting there. As you can see, we're within the mark, so nothing wrong with that. And let me check each one real quick. That looks good. And that looks good. So that looks like it's cut out well. Now you may have to scribe and cut some off the bottom where it meets your concrete slab if you're going to a concrete slab, because concrete does have variation in it sometimes. Unlike this platform we just made, the landing, it's probably going to be pretty flat and level because we just built it. But with concrete, it can have some variation. So now that we know that's good to go, again, we're going to have a pressure treated kick plate. And also I'm going to put a little flashing tape on the bottom of this so it doesn't come in direct contact with that concrete. So now that's good, let's continue moving. All right, now I got a 16-footer here. This is what we need to do the next set of stringers going from the platform up to the second story. And I already crowned this. The crown is up right here. So we're going to go along this edge and put our layout on it. So we're going to start from the end here. Now, just like our last layout, we're going to start at our 10 1/4 and 7 1/4. So we're going to continue that pattern. And now we're just going to continue laying it out similar to how we did the last one, but there's going to be a little difference here, but it ain't going to be till we get to the end of the layout. So there's that, and that's going to be cut out, and then we're going to extend. Now again, take an 1.5 inch off. That's the thickness of this blade. Okay, that gets cut out. Now we're going to continue our steps. And again, this bottom needs a kicker board on it. So we're just going to lay this up on the layout. And then we're going to trace this. And then that's going to need cut out. And right here at the last step before we go to the upstairs, this we do not subtract the 3/4 inch like our last stringer, because we do got to put the inch lumber as a riser. So now with that being said, we're simply going to cut this off straight with our layout. So this is just a simple cut off. And now we're just going to cut this stringer out like we did the last one. All right, now that we got this one cut out, we're going to dry fit it as well, just like we did the bottom, just to make sure everything's cut out correctly. The stringer is setting into place where it should go. Now I'm going to double check with my level just to make sure where the treads are sitting, that's nice and level. I'm going to jump down off this landing because the camera's sitting on the landing at the moment. And I'm just going to double check here. And as you can see, I don't know if you can see with the camera, but the bubble is perfect right there. That looks good. And something else I wanted to add, we did add a ledger board at the bottom of that header as well. So that's going to be the ledger board for up above. And now that we know that we're cut out correctly, we're going to take this down and cut out the rest of the stringers. Now here's the cool part. All we got to do now, since we got a template, is simply lay this up on another 2x12 and trace it and then cut it out, and do that with the rest of the stringers for this stairwell, and we're going to be good to go. So the hard part's over, all the calculating and everything. And also, because we have this template, we don't have to waste material at the end of the 2x6, or sorry, at the end of the 2x12, because we didn't have to slide our square to get the measurement. So we're actually have enough off this 16-footer to get a tread, so that's cool. All right, let's cut these out. In order to use this as a template, I've got 2 clamps here. I'm going to clamp one here at this end, then one here at this end, so it doesn't shift while I'm marking it off. And also make sure you have a really sharp pencil so that way you can get as close to that template as you can while you're marking it. So in order to mark this template, as you can see, we're flush on the end here and we're flush right on the straight side. And we already crowned this board that we're getting ready to cut up just like we did the original stringer. So now that we got it into place, we're just going to clamp it down right there. So that side's clamped tight. Now we're going to come over here to this end and I'm going to clamp this tight. Make sure we're lined up perfectly flush. And that looks good. Clamp it down right there. Now I'm going to take my sharp pencil and just trace each one of the steps. Hold your pencil tight in that crease and just mark it like so. All right, now that's all traced, we're going to remove the clamps and then cut it out. I now got all the stringers cut out. I got 4 for after the landing going up, and then I got 4 down here before the landing. And what I like to do is place them all together like you see here. Just take a straight edge on a few just to double check, make sure everything looks good. As you can see, everything lines up really well here. So we're good to go. And what I like to do is add a skirt board to each side that butts up against the wall. So that way you don't have to trim around each step or cut around it with paint. And especially when you're drywalling, you don't have to cut the drywall around each set of stringers. So a skirt board is something I highly recommend. You don't have to per code in my area, but it's something that does make a nice, easy job when it comes to finishing. And also, I like to make sure my steps or my stair stringers are at least 16 on center and no further apart. Sometimes with decks you can get away with 2 foot on center, but still 16 on center gives you a nice solid step. So I actually cut 4 of these, so we're closer than that. We're about 10" on center or so. So it's going to be a very strong set of stairs by the time we're said and done. I'm going to begin by placing 2 2x12s up here on the sawhorses. And now I know these aren't long enough to go clear up the side of each stringer that's going to be against the wall, but they only had 12-foot stuff here local, and it's no big deal because it doesn't have to be a solid piece for what we're doing here. And now I'm going to set a stringer up on each one of these that's going to go up against the wall. I'm using the 1.5" lumber for the skirt board. A lot of people just use 3/4 board for the skirt board, so by the time the drywall butts up against it, you have just a 1/4 inch to caulk. So with this board, we can either put molding against it, but since we're building this in a garage, probably just caulk right up against it or paint up against it. So that way it's going to be a nice finish no matter how you look at it. When it comes to lining up the stringer with the skirt board, we got to remember that this is going to actually keep extending up on the skirt board in order to cover once it's up against the wall. So right here is our tread at the top of the step, and then this where it butts right up against that ledger board at the top. So with that being said, we need to also compensate for our tread. So I'm going to place this right where the tread's going to be because we're going to be using this lumber for our tread. And as you can see, we got about a 1/2 inch exposed here. So that's about where we want that placed. I would like to add that I should have added 3/4 of an inch for the thickness of the riser, and that would have pushed the tread out a little further for this skirt, but it worked out just fine. And now we're going to extend this line up just as if we're going to cut it to make sure we're slid down enough on the skirt board. So I know I want to keep this here, so I'm just going to place a screw into this and then into the skirt board to hold this in place. And I'm going to place just a 2.5 inch screw so that way it doesn't penetrate through the skirt board. And now that that screw's in place, I'm going to measure what it is from the skirt board to the bottom of the stringer, and we got 2.5 inches. So we need to make sure this same reveal is at the bottom of the stringer. I'm here at the bottom of the stringer. Again, I got to extend this skirt board to finish up this run, but let's first get this in place. As you can see, we're right at 2.5 there. So I'm going to place a screw to hold it into place. All right, then I'm going to place a few up the skirt board to hold it from shifting. And now when we place the next stringer up here for the skirt board, we need to make sure it's the opposing way this one's laying. So clearly this would be on the left side and then this is going to be on the right side. Then we just repeat the process that we did here, except we're on this side. Now to extend the rest of this, we're just going to take another piece of the 2x12, place it right up flat in this butt joint, nice and square, which that looks really good here. And now we got to think about the tread ending here. We're going to be using the 2x12 to go right back against this for the tread. So these are actually a little thinner than normal. They're about 11 1/8, these 2x12s we have. So it's going to stop right here. And then we got to extend this bottom where it's sitting on the floor to be cut off. So that's how we figure to finish this up. So I'm just going to place this flat as if this was the floor. And to extend this line down to be cut out, we're just going to take our square that we used for cutting the stringers out, lining it right up at that mark. Then finish that up right there. We just got to cut that out in order to finish that up and do the same for the other side. And now we're just going to cut each end to finish up each side. We're now just going to line this up. All right, we're flush with the floor. This is where the floor is. Again, it looks good. We're flush up here. And now we're just going to put a couple screws to hold that into place. I'm now going to finish cutting off the upper part of the skirt. First thing I'm going to do is flip this over. So then we're going to flip this one over as well. Now all we got to do is extend the cut from here up and then this one from here up. So now I just got to mark right here where they intercept the bottom of the skirt. I'm now just going to take the framing square, keep that same angle on the rise side of the stringer. And if you remember right, we should be angling towards each corner here. Then on this side, now we're going to cut each end off here. I also need to cut the tip of this off where it butts into the 3/4 subfloor up above. So I'm just going to take my speed square and square right off that, about right here, and cut that off. Then do the same to this one. Now we're going to set these up into place. I now got it temporarily setting here. While he's holding it, I'm going to check with my level to make sure it's setting right. And if you check it here, it looks good. We're setting nice and level. So we're going to place a screw here to hold it into place. And the best thing to do is hold down here where the tread's going to cover up onto the skirt board. Place a screw to hold it. All right, now I'm going to place screws up along the wall here to hold this into place. Now we're going to set the next one up for the side against the wall here. Now I'm going to install these brackets that are designed to hold stringers to the header. And now with these, I'm going to place these in the middle here. And then on the sides, I'm going to place these in order to tie it into the header like so. So I got these straps for the corners and then these brackets here for the middle stringers. And again, always check your local building code to see what you need to use to secure them. And then also, I got to put the layout in order to space my stringers evenly. If we take a measurement here, I got 36 inches in between these two stringers. So in order to space out the ones in the middle evenly, I just got to go 11 inches to edge in order to space them out. So I'm going to put the layout here first before installing the straps in order to secure everything. I'm now going to put on my eye protection and place these brackets here in order to conceal it behind the stringer. And if you're interested in purchasing any of these brackets or any of the tools in this video, be sure to check the links in the description below so you can check them out for yourself. I'm now going to install the kickboard at the bottom, and we're just going to slide that in the slots that we cut out while we cut out our stringers. And we just need to make sure we put a screw down into each joist on the landing to secure this into place. And I'm also going to put my layout for my stringer to place evenly across here as well. Now we're ready to set our stringers into place. Now that I got the stringers setting up here to where they need secured, I'm going to take a straight edge from the original stringers we put on each side. So that's going to give us our elevation. So now I'm going to place my stringer that I just placed up here on the wall just to make sure we're setting correctly with the elevation. As you can see, they're setting exactly where we need them. It's nice and straight and nothing's rocking, and that is what you want. So now that they're setting where we want them, all I gotta do is nail them off to the brackets that we have installed here. And just so you know, what I'm using here is a metal strap nailer to nail these brackets on. You can also use Tico nails to do this as well. From below on this side, I'm just gonna flex those brackets up flat against the stringer and nail them off to the stringer. All we gotta do down here at the bottom is place them on the layout and then secure them with screws so they don't move. I'm now going to work on the bottom set of steps that meet the concrete, and a couple things I wanted to go over. The first thing is I'm going to use flashing tape and place it on the bottom of this stringer to where it comes in contact with the concrete. And I could have used pressure treated boards here instead of doing this, but this is what I had on hand and it's going to be fine for this application. And also, wherever I have the kicker board on the concrete, this is going to be a pressure treated board like I explained earlier, so there's nothing wrong there. And then the next thing I need to explain is I'm going to use a ram set in order to attach the kicker board to the concrete and just anchor it with the galvanized nails. Since we're going to concrete, that's what we got to do. Or I could use Tapcons here, so either one's fine. So I'm just going to do a time lapse putting this little section together. I now have all the stringers installed and secured for this staircase. So now I need to cut the treads that go on top of each stringer. And in order to cut these, I just got to get a measurement in between the skirt. And that's going to let me know how long I need to cut my treads. Now these treads are going to be made out 2x12s. So I simply just got to cut them the length and install them on the stringers. The tread length is 39 1/4 here, so I'm going to cut 3 of them in order to make these treads. When I cut treads, I like to use a miter saw because I got to cut a lot of them and they have to be pretty accurate. So a miter saw, and especially one that slides like so I can make long cuts, that's going to speed up the process tremendously. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I now got to install the boards for my risers first before the treads. So in order to build those, I just got to cut these to length. These are 1x8s and they actually measure 7 1/4 from the store. So I don't have to rip them down. So I'm going to measure 39 1/4 in order to start my backs for my risers. In order to install the risers, I just got my finish nailer I'm going to nail them on with. And if you remember right, when I built these stringers, this back is going to act as the riser, so I don't have to place a board there. So for the next one, I just got to take my trim board that's going to act as the riser and place it right against the back like so. And if anything, when you install these, you want to make sure they're just right at the top, if not slightly above the edge of the stringer, so that way it covers up the actual treads gap. So that looks good there. So now I'm going to tack that on with a nail. Then we're going to place the next one on. And now this bottom one I got to rip down because if you remember right, the tread counts as the riser in this case. In order to install the treads, I'm just going to use these 2.5-inch deck screws, and also I'm going to secure them down to the stringers using subfloor adhesives. So I'm just going to run the subfloor adhesive on the top of each stringer and then put 3 screws in each tread to secure it to the stringers. And now I'm just going to screw down my treads. Then just continue that pattern with the whole set of steps. I'm here on the last step, and just a refresher, unlike the landing, we do got to put a board against this to finish it off because I didn't want to see this header with all the nails in it. So I'm just going to place my trim board in here first and pull it up tight to the subfloor. Now I'm going to nail it to the back of that header. I'm now going to place subfloor adhesive here on the treads. I'm now going to place the tread right on top of that stringer. I'm now going to place a screw in this back corner to hold it into place. I'm now going to take my speed square and mark so the screws are placed evenly. I'm going to mark 3, 6 1/4, and about 1.5 inches off the back. And now when I cut this subfloor off, I left it a little heavy so that way I could trim this off exactly to what I need. So I'm going to do that now. And now if we take a measurement, we got 7 1/4 to our finished height, just like we wanted. Something I'd like to mention here from the transition from the step to the second story, or even from the bottom set of steps up to the landing, if we take a measurement, our overhang's about 3/4 inch. So right here we cut it flush. So I'm going to be adding a 3/4 inch nose here and something that's going to be more durable than this subfloor. But I'm going to add this after the construction's done in this building. So that's going to keep our step nose consistent and it's going to give it a nice finished look. I now would like to go over a recap of the codes I went over while I was building these stairs, along with some additional ones that I have not mentioned yet. So a quick recap on some of the ones we already talked about. Our max rise or riser can't be any more than 7 3/4 inch. So that's something that's very important, that you definitely can't go above that. And while you're building your steps or stairs, you also want to keep in mind your runs or your treads. We can't have it any shorter than a 10-inch tread, or in other words, a place to where you step. And here's another thing you got to remember. If you do have a step or a tread that is anywhere from 10 inches to 11 inches, you must have a nose that's anywhere from 3/4 to 1.25 inches. In which, that being said, that overhang, which is also known as the nose, is something that is required if it's anywhere from 10 inches to 11 inches in length of the tread, or width of the tread, I should say. And with that being said, if it is 11 inches or greater, you don't have to have a nose, but I do always recommend having a nose of at least 3/4 inch in my opinion. It's definitely a comfortable and a aesthetically pleasing look. And next, minimal head clearance is 6'8", so I cannot go below 6'8" while I'm going up my stairs to the ceiling. So the finished ceiling and the finished stairs cannot be any closer than 6'8" while you're going up your flight of stairs. Very important, and sometimes it's hard to get that in certain situations, but with the right calculations, it is doable. Next, 3/8 inch variation on your rise. So while you're going up your steps, if you have a 7 1/4 inch step and then your last one is 7 1/2, in my area, that little bit of variation is no big deal. Again, always check your local building codes, but that's a good general rule of thumb, is you can have a little bit of variation, just not a lot. Any more than 3/8 is against code here. 36 inch minimum width of your staircase. You can't have any more narrow than 3 feet. So it's just like a hallway. A hallway can't be any more narrow than 3 feet as well. And again, that's finished with drywall on the wall. Something very important to note. But in this case, the skirt was already more narrow than what drywall is going to be. So we already know we're well within code here. And next, 36 inch minimal landing. So I've always been taught a good rule of thumb is if you have a 40 inch wide step it's nice to have a 40-inch long landing at least, because you know you're already going to be as wide as 38-inch, but it's nice to have that distance as well. So it has a more aesthetically pleasing and a comfortable feel while you're walking up and down the steps. But if you have a 40-inch wide set of stairs, you can have a landing that's a minimum of 36 inches long, but obviously it's going to be as wide as that anyways. But with that being said, you just want to make sure you're within that code, so that's a pretty simple one to follow. Max flight height is typically no more than 12 foot 7 inches, and it adds up to be no more than 16 rises. So that is something that clearly here we easily got in that, because our max ceiling height is only about 9 foot 6. So if you're going into a really tall basement or something, that's something you definitely want to keep in mind. You almost always have to have a landing going into a basement anyways, but you need to break it up with the landing if you're any taller than that. You don't want a straight set of stairs going straight up, and that's something to keep in mind. Next, you can always reference online calculators. There's a lot of online calculators out there. There's several websites where you can just punch in your height and your distance, stuff like that, and whatever you're going to be using is treads, and it'll automatically calculate your stairs. So I highly recommend somebody that doesn't do stairs all the time to use those online calculators, and it's not anything to be ashamed of, because they can be complicated, and you don't want to mess up a nice 2x12 board when they cost 30-40 bucks a piece. So I highly recommend referencing online calculators while you're building your set of stairs. So that's a general rule of thumb with the codes. And if you want to see how I built this whole garage, check out this video. It'll help you out.